Let's move on to our first panel session of the day, and as always, at the end of the session, we're going to open the floor for questions. I'm not too sure how the moderator is going to handle this. I was told that one of the moderators would like to have an interaction throughout the panel session, so let's just leave it to the moderator. And I have to add a disclaimer here, and of course, when we do SDG panel sessions, we would like to include inclusivity, we would like to include both genders as panelists. But due to an unforeseen circumstances, last-minute withdrawal of one female panelist, this will be an all-male panel. We sincerely apologize for that. It's here on my script. I was told to say that. Those fine prints at the bottom of the script there. Now, the first panel session will be on the investor's view, encompassing sustainability into companies' evaluation. Please welcome the panelists to take their place on stage. Mr. Raymond Tang, Chief Executive Officer of Eastspring Investments Berhad. Mr. Jeevan Rajoo, Country Head of Tata Consultancy Services Malaysia. And I believe our next panelist will be joining us virtually, Mr. Chandru Badrinarayanan, Chief Operating Officer of Blue Sky Analytics, and he'll be joining us online. The moderator for this session, a little background on our moderator. He is the Asia Pacific Head of Strategic Relations and Initiatives at Bloomberg LP. Works with senior stakeholders from government. You may take your place on stage. Let me just go through the script. From government, regulators, capital markets, corporates, and foundations in identifying and executing joint strategic initiatives to affect positive change by enhancing market transparency, build local communities, and help advance capital market development in Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator, Mr. Nitin Jaiswal. And I shall pass the floor over to Mr. Nitin. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So as you can clearly see, goal number 5 for SDG, we are not meeting. So that will be our task for the next year, to have proper diversity. But I think, but let me also quickly give a disclaimer as well, that, while we are here, our spouses have played a very important part in where we are. So physically, they may not be present here in this panel, but they are in our spirit. So we actually have the diversity presented through their support. That is how I see it. So let me get going on this panel. So one of the things my boss, Michael Bloomberg, always says, that what cannot be measured cannot be managed. What cannot be managed, Raymond, as an investor will agree, cannot be invested in. And we have seen in the recent crisis of what's happened in crypto is a very good example of what happens when you are unable to measure and you're unable to manage and you invest. Okay? And when we talk about this whole concept of measurement, one of the biggest challenges we see is the measurement of companies' efforts and investors' effort in the sustainability space. There are many reasons for that. One, there's so many different frameworks out there. There's so many guidelines which need to be followed, which is creating a lot of confusion and also leading to what we call the greenwashing. And recent 2 examples, we have seen what happened where Amundi has to downgrade some of its funds away from the ESG because of that reason. And we also have seen the fine which Goldman Sachs has to pay because of the confusion around ESG in the US space. So while the intentions are correct, but because of all the issues surrounding how do you measure and how do you push, the concept of sustainability is holding back its growth. So we are blessed to have 3 interesting speakers with us to help navigate this topic. So we have one investor, Raymond Tang, my very good and old friend from Malaysia. So he is the CEO of Eastspring, one of the largest asset managers in Malaysia and also around the world as part of the Prudential Group. He is going to give from the investor's perspective. On my other hand, I have Jeevan Rajoo. He's the country head for Tata Consultancy. As you all know, Tata Consultancy is world's one of the largest IT companies, and in India, they're foremost in terms of promoting sustainability and good governance. And on the third person on the panel is quite interesting. We also got somebody who is into the space of technology. They use cutting-edge technology from space to measure and track the whole carbon and the sustainability space, among other things. So with these three panelists, we are going to discuss few of the elements which we wanted to know about how do we accelerate companies' compliance from the investor's perspective of the SDG goals. So Raymond, let me start with you. As we were discussing earlier, so what I see the challenge we have in the space of sustainable, following the sustainable investment goals is I call the problem of plenty. Okay, so you have so many frameworks to follow. Each country, each organization, and each region has its own framework in terms of what is sustainable and what is not. Okay, and in many cases, what happens is it creates so much of confusion, and it also leads to greenwashing. So from your perspective as an investor, what is the biggest challenge you see, whether a company is following the SDG or the sustainable guidelines or not?
Thank you, Nitin. It's SDG, we are looking at it as something new because of the acronyms, and there are a lot of huge acronyms. As an investor, I also get confused. Where is the overlap between PRI, SDG, ESG, and whatnot, every TFCD? And they're all subsets of each other, and I get confused. As a fund manager, we would just like to know what can I invest in and what I cannot invest in, right? So how does that work for us? So I think that it's good that the world has gotten together, I think under the ISSB, the IFRS Sustainability Board, to come together with a global reporting framework. I think that's very important. Because if you have different reporting guidelines and different ambiguities in each jurisdiction, you're not going to get the kind of critical mass, right, that is required. And you as CFOs know what I mean. If we do not have IAS, or during my time, what I call the SSAP, accounting standards, nobody can read each other's accounts. No, everybody will doubt each other's accounts. And that, I think, will be a big starting point. And it's important. Now, sustainability is something very new. So, as I was sitting there, this story piqued my mind, and I just quickly Googled it and to confirm. One very early adopters of SDG was actually Henry Ford. You all know the story? $5 a day? Right. In 1914, the average worker was paid, manufacturing worker was paid $2.34 a day, US dollars. But he went and paid his workers $5 a day. Well, as you have CFO say, why you're doubling my wage bill, my profit goes down. But he actually had a longer term vision. By paying the workers more, there was a demand for people who want to work in this company. And the company and the employees got to fight to stay in the company. So you get higher productivity. When he was asked why he was doing that, well, I produce cars. If I don't give my workers more, how are they going to be my future customers? Who's going to buy my products if I don't pay them well? Right. So it started this big middle-class drive. I won't go to the details. You can Google it up. Henry Ford paid workers more, $5 a day. You can see the full story. He actually embraced some of these goals. And to actually drive it through, he has some of these esoteric, views where no alcohol is permitted at work. You must 8-day work day, which is unheard of. Talk about work-life balance in 1914. So he is a visionary in that sense. And we've come to this day and age now where we're trying to encompass it and bucket it. It's not something which can be wrapped around in 3 alphabets or in accounting formats. It has to go beyond that. So what I'm saying is the framework does help, but you've got to live it. Right. I hope that helps.
Thank you for sharing that anecdote with us. So from an investor's perspective, let me move to a corporate perspective. So it's not that corporates don't have challenges, because again, each organization is coming out with different frameworks, is how you should be reporting your SDG framework and also the sustainability framework. So from a corporate perspective, also you have the problem of plenty, what to focus on and how to overcome that. So Jeevan, from your perspective, how do you actually look at the whole SDG compliance?
Sure. I think from Tata Group, we break it into three main pillars. One is humanity, technology, innovation. And why we break it very categorically into these three is whatever we do touches into these three buckets. Whatever we do, there is an element of what we do for humanity. And we being a technology company, everything we do is technology-based. And innovation is also becoming a key component in all of this enterprise work that we do. But more importantly, I think it's the ethos of the organization, and like what Richard said, the culture of the organization is to make them feel part and parcel of a larger ecosystem, that we have to act responsible, we have to act fairly to all genders, and we need to incorporate that to the talent pool that we have. In TCS, we today have 650,000 people, associates with us. Out of the 650,000 employees we have in TCS, the average age is 28 years old. I'm on the other side of the spectrum. So the average age is 28 years old. And the challenge they all have is the fact that what is this organization standing for? Am I working for an organization which has sense of purpose? And that has obviously been the guiding principle for TCS as well as Tata Group, that whatever we do, there's always the element of community. And if some of you, if you've done your research on Tata Group, 67% of dividends that go to Tata Group, it's paid back to community. We run cancer hospitals, we run Institute of Science, and it's a whole circular economy itself since the 1900s. And that's how it is. It's now we have nice acronyms like SDGs and stuff like that. But in many years ago, it was just a way of life. And we embraced that way of life, and we created more jobs for people so they can be much more sustainable. And in return, the business came to us. And that's how we used that same framework: humanity, technology, innovation.
Thank you, Jeevan, for giving that three pillars. So before I go to Chandru virtually, the two things which I actually picked up, it's quite interesting. And so I would like to make sure that, as the MC was saying earlier, I don't want to keep the Q&A at the end. I would like to have this, conversation going with you all. And I want to see my role more as a conversation starter, because end of the day, it is you who would have a lot of, thoughts and questions for the panelists. Feel free to go to the app to submit your questions, and we'll be happy. And I don't want to, keep everything at the end, so that I take as many questions as possible without worrying about the constraint of the time. Okay. So the two key things is, one is, the concept of SDG is actually evolutionary. It has been there. What is required is, from the business perspective, a far-sightedness and long-term vision rather than a short-term profit. And the second aspect was very interesting, which I also wanted to discuss, that let's not put the focus of SDG on the corporations. Let's put and include, what we call the inclusive is one of them, the individuals within that organization. Because one of the challenges which I see with all this climate and all that, we are always putting the, the whole compliance on the institutions, but not on the individuals. Till the time individuals are not involved, institutions will not be forced to actually follow that. So that was a very good thought, to include, individuals into the conversation. And he also talked about technology, and that is where I bring my third speaker. So Chandru actually is the Chief Operating Officer at a cutting-edge space tech company. We all know about fintech and all tech, but space tech is something, an emerging field. And one of the things they do is they capture a lot of data from space, which can actually help companies track their SDG goals and progress, largely from 7 and 13, which is the climate action and the sustainability element. So Chandru, first I just wanted to find out, how you go about using technology from space, which could help companies meet the SDG goals using technology and data capture.
Be here on this panel and to listen to all of you. I am actually Chief Operating Officer of Blue Sky Analytics, a space tech and a climate tech company. Been in an organization like ASEAN and S&P before. Now to your specific question, Nitin, a great question. I would say that, whether you take investors, banks, companies, regulators, and all stakeholders, everyone wants to understand precisely the effect of climate change to various assets, whether they are in the form of land, water bodies, real estate, roads, dams, biodiversity, operations, and so on. Now, banks are interested to pin a dollar value to their risk exposures, which is emanating from climate change. Investors want companies, and I listened with a lot of interest to what Raymond said, and investors want companies to represent the current and true picture of climate risk to their operations, supply chains, and the effect of their operations on the environment, what we call a double materiality. And regulators are, very much worried about the cascading effects of climate change, or what we call a systemic risk. So investors and regulators also require assurance on many aspects of disclosures and reporting. Now, in all these things, data plays a very central and critical role. And clean and high frequency, I'd like to emphasize the word high frequency, which is like daily, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly data from credible third-party sources are not easily available today for a majority of physical risk across the world. If you take satellites, they're becoming more powerful and more ubiquitous and are producing tons of data. But these are like mining ore, and they have limited use unless they are actually refined to a complex process. So companies like ours, like Blue Sky Analytics, use such satellite data and use sophisticated algorithms to cleanse the data and refine them to produce high-frequency climate data sets for a number of physical risks like wildfire predictions, wildfire emissions, surface water mapping, emissions tracking, flood forecasting, measurement of carbon sinks, etc., in a high-frequency and a more reliable, transparent, and above all, economical way than what data is traditionally being mined today from company disclosures and other methods. So that's where we add a lot of value. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. No, I think thank you for sharing that, because I was going through their website. It's quite interesting how, again, Raymond talked about the evolution from the concept, but I think the satellite and the use of technology is a new evolution which we have to look to see how we could, support and also encourage companies to comply and focus on different aspects of SDG, because the tools are available, as Chandru, talked about. I just want to, come back to, Jeevan and Raymond on that. See, we are like, different SDG goals. In most of the cases, we end up focusing on few. But again, for us to be really, creating impact in the society and protecting this world, we need to ensure that we are focusing on the entire spectrum of SDG goals rather than one or two. Okay. So, Jeevan, this time let me start with you. To understand how we could actually get companies to focus on wider aspect of SDG rather than narrow down into 2 or 3 things, which are generally the headline things, which is the climate.
Sure. In TCS, we have a Chief Sustainability Officer. That's fine. But in TCS Malaysia, we've taken a completely different approach. One approach is, I said, I'm not going to have a Chief Sustainability Officer, because it's not a task of one person to make sure an organization is sustainable. So I made that very conscious choice. There is no one Chief Sustainability Officer, because I say everyone working for TCS Malaysia is the Chief Sustainability Officer. Everyone has a moral obligation. Everyone has a technology obligation to do something sustainable. We are a technology company. Every project that we do in Malaysia with all the GLCs, I've now made it mandatory to have a sustainability agenda to it. There must be a sustainable event or a purpose that you do that technology project. Because, number one, I have youngsters, and the youngsters want to have a purposeful organization. And doing technology project today, in today's time, is no more rocket science. Everybody can do it. But the trick of the game is, how do you create impact to society while doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's the trick. And hence, we in Malaysia, TCS Malaysia, we've literally taken this whole sustainability in a different level. We've enforced and encouraged all our youngsters to be chief sustainable officers in their own right, in their own respective projects, so that they can work with our customers and clients to come up with much more innovative work. And there's only two areas that we focus, I must say. Environment, we're working very hard on the environment, and we're talking about carbon capture, carbon measurement. The other one is society. We're doing a lot of work on social enterprises. How do we create social enterprises? In future, 5 to 10 years' time, Raymond will testify this, that the move from capital markets will gradually move from energy companies to social enterprises companies, because that shift is already happening. Pension funds are not putting money into energy-intensive companies. So that shift is gradually happening. You'll see a new breed of startups coming up in social enterprises. And we are spending a lot of time in that social enterprises space.
That brings a very interesting point, Raymond. So when you talk to companies, okay, when you look at their sustainability and SDG goals overall, you see this challenge where, what I discussed, that people end up focusing on certain narrow elements of SDG, which are the headlines one, like climate, clean energy, or you are seeing a trend where corporates are more focusing on the entire spectrum of the SDG.
I think that for a corporate to embrace all 17 tenets of the SDG is going to be a very, very daunting task. So we always encourage them to start with something which is more relevant, visible, low-hanging. I think energy is very simple. I would say an easy task to achieve. So by that, we engage with them, say, look, are there any better ways to lower your energy bill, right? We personally live it in Prudential, right? Our building is one of the gold LED buildings in the country. It's a bit more expensive to construct, but in the long run, it's really worth it. What we're saying that is all the windows are double glazed, which means that temperature climate control in the office and the energy bill is lowered. We did deliberately reconfigure the office that there are very few printers. And if you print something, you have to walk 50, 100 feet to pick up what you print. Seriously. So, and we configure it, if you need to print, it's in black and white, double-sided. So we make it pushing them to do more digital. And our hope is they pick up some of these habits and bring it home and practice it as become part of their life. And one interesting story is that 3 weeks ago, I was interviewing somebody for a job. Nothing to do with ESG. But they gravitated to that the employee, quite a senior, prospect was interviewing what are my ESG practices in the company. So I got a bit taken aback. So when you employ the more younger part, the Gen Zs and all, who are very into this, I think you will need a storyline and the facts that you're walking the talk in your company to attract the talent. Because talent nowadays is very fickle, and they once they embrace something, they embrace it very passionately, right? And to them, it's more than just the daily wage or the monthly wage. It's more that I want to be part of organizations which walks the talk. Right? So I think that start with low-hanging fruits, and once they get traction and the board buys in, then it's easier to introduce the more anomalous concepts. Right?
So, I think I'm going to come back to very interesting, I'm going to go to Chandru for a question, but one part which I want to come back is, this whole focus on the climate part, the reason I raised is that should we actually relook at redefining the term SDG itself? When you put sustainability, everything goes to climate. Okay, maybe we actually call is a diversified development goal. Okay, or maybe the other option is to really segregate climate out of it so that people actually do climate and they say we are meeting SDG goals. But the reality is we have to focus on all 17 and 18 goals for us to be an effective way to protect the citizen. That's the point we will actually discuss as a thought leadership conversation after this. So Chandru, let me come to you. From the technology perspective, you said you could actually go to at a chimney level and figure out how much carbon emission is a company is able to come out with. So that will actually help to stop in some way the greenwashing, stuff like that. So when you talk to the corporates, when you try to sell the data, when you're having talking to them about your solutions, what are the conversations like? What is the pushback, and what are the stuff they want more from technology?
Yeah, I think one is the pushback is about actually understanding of the requirement itself. Of do we actually require this kind of data, and how do we actually start integrating some of this data into our operations, and how would that actually, what would be the cost of something like that? So it is an evolutionary approach, which actually corporates are taking, and I'd like to generalize corporates as a whole. So there are corporates who are very progressive, who want to actually get into this and then understand more and how it can actually help, and they're very open to actually engaging on this aspects. But in most places, the larger the corporation, the decision making is like a grid. So it just takes actually so much of time to actually get through to the right people within large organizations to actually kind of send this message. And the other thing I would say, Nitin, is most organizations also sit in their own comfort zones. So everybody and organizations are also actually into their comfort zones, and there are so many things actually happening. So for them to actually stand and pick this up and then move on, either on actually I would say on disclosures, transparency, measurement, and everything, they also require a push, I would say, from actually regulators or from actually investors. So they do actually grapple with many of their own problems, but then these are something which companies like us would be able to actually solve it at a much faster pace. And but the only thing is, they find there is a resistance to change, which actually it's a natural human tendency which actually comes up. But apart from that, if there is a push from the, I would say, investors or from actually regulators, I think these things get done much more quickly.
Thank you, Chandru. So I just want to get you guys involved into the conversation now. In case if you don't have question, but one place where I want you guys to express your views, because we could actually see here, is do we actually look at segregating climate out of the SDG so that companies don't end up focusing on the ESG part, which actually includes a lot on climate, and then they are forced to look at the other elements of that? Is there a need for us to basically do that so that we are forcing companies to focus on all the aspect of it? And the second part where I want you guys to be part of the conversation is really, do we call it sustainable development goal or do we call it diversified development goal? Because I feel sustainable again is leading back to every conversation is on climate, okay? But there are more problems in this world than climate itself, like gender was one of the things which we discussed. So if you have your views on that, if you have any questions, I strongly encourage you guys to participate in this conversation, going through the app and putting that. In the meantime, let me go to Jeevan to exactly get his views on what he feels is there a need for us, or my assumption of is wrong.
I think the need for it is very much evident. But like Raymond said, you can't boil the ocean. There's too much going on. There are the spectrum of companies who have not started in this journey. The spectrum of companies are midway, and some companies are probably advanced, especially in European countries. But the journey must start. I think all of us cohesively agree that the journey must start. And eventually you will come to know that the capital market will reward you as an organization doing it right as opposed to greenwashing it. Data is very prevalent. We do work for the banks today in Malaysia, and they are talking about buying sustainable. They want to make sure their vendors are sustainable. And they want to make sure that they are reporting on quarterly basis whether they are greenwashing or not. So the shift is going to happen invariably. Now, from ESG perspective, environment is a huge problem. It's a global, it's not a Malaysia, but it's a huge global problem. But we're all responsible in some shape or form, so we need to do something. But the impact on climate is hard to be seen. I can say I want to completely run my house on solar. Would it mean that there's going to stop the rainfall that we're having right now? Not really. But you have to do it, number one. But what is closest to us as human is the S side of it, where we can start humanizing organizations, start humanizing the relationship that we have with the local communities at large. And if you spend time with that and you keep the S also equally important as the E, then you have the right talent igniting to do something very significant. So we, as in TCS, we kept the E and the S part of it very close to our hearts, and whatever we do, we'll think about it. The governance is obviously, the corporate governance is obviously there, but governance at the larger area, we've not really spent much time in that space.
So, but do you think we should actually call this diversified development goal than just a sustainable? Because again, I said the sustainable is going back to the climate, because that is the sense which I get. Because when we talk about, in many cases, SDG, I have still water, sparkling water bottles in front of me. That means we are not focusing on the water problem. Just a thought, because it's just a thought leader discussion where I wanted to have, to get your view whether the way I am seeing the problem is the right, or you think the way we are doing SDG is the right way?
I think this whole, how can I say, the bus for SDG and sustainability is really running fast. Everywhere, whether Europe, Malaysia, Australia, wherever it is running fast. To leverage that bus will be the best approach, number one. To move the bus into a different direction will be also difficult. So I, for one, from TCS perspective, we are leveraging that particular bus. On that bus, we're taking it to a direction that we know best, given our organization, as much as you will know best in your own ecosystem play. And that's how we're taking it.
Thank you, Jeevan. So Raymond, what about your views on this?
Development, sustainability, they're all part of the same, diversified. Yeah, I mean, as fund managers, we like a diversified portfolio, right? But I think that also that the question is the diversity. If you look at the goals itself, it changes over time. The importance of which I would say that some are more prevalent, some are more longer term goals, some are mindset changes, some are immediate. But I think that in order to, as Jeevan was saying, the rush to be more sustainable climate change, I think there's a danger that we throw the baby out of the bathwater. And basically, give you an example. You're all CFOs, you understand this. Let's look at our own national power producer, Tenaga. It's not exactly on the, I would say, the A list of climate change. They have cash flow about 1 to 1.5 billion, 1.8 billion a year. They have debt of about 24 billion. Now, if the whole world deemed that they are bad boys, and I don't want to invest in Tenaga, or take up any of the refinancing, so the 23 billion, when it comes to refinancing, what will happen? You are CFOs, you tell me. Do we shut down the national grid and say that, yes, we are compliant on the east side, there's no more, there's all blue skies. And then we have to chop down firewood for our houses? I mean, where is the balance in that? Right? I think we need to be able to transition it, which I think is a very important word, over time. We are sad to say we are in an instant society. If I want something, I want it done now. Or like my old boss always say, I want it done yesterday, right? But you can't do 17 things yesterday where you are not even properly set up, you don't have the framework to do it. But the journey got to start somewhere. And you talk to 10 or 100 different people, you get 100 different opinions of where to start, how to start. But the word is to start somewhere, right? And it's easy to start from somewhere which is more visible before you go on to a more difficult things to handle, because at least you will have the momentum behind you. So I'm saying this is to be careful in where what you're doing, that there are consequences. Take, for example, take back the Tenaga, the National Grid thing. If that happens, a lot of industries will be our business. They won't be able to start their factories. Offices will not be able to start. The LRT may not be able to work. Nobody gets to work. Then what happens to society as a whole? Jobs will be lost. There'll be chaos, anarchy. Is that what we want to fulfill the E? We throw out the S. You know, it has to be balanced, like a portfolio which is balanced. Right? That's how I see it.
Thank you. I think it was a good to get that perspective, because I thought, let me divert from it and to get some thought-provoking thoughts, and I think I got that, and I see one of the comments also over there on the same topic. So we start getting questions. So just let me go to Chandru before you guys start looking at some of the questions you want to take. Chandru, from your side, we talk about the measurement and we talk about the evolution. So have you seen any example of, as Jeevan said, that I use solar, I don't know how I'm actually impacting, because I don't feel that I'm able to create an impact because I don't see it. Okay. From your satellite data, from the technology and the algorithms you have built, do you have any examples of where you have seen that things have actually improved or worsened because of all the measures which companies and the governments are taking? If you have any, I will be happy to hear that.
There are quite a few things which we have seen where things have worsened, and also they become better. I think what is happening is this: once people come to know that there is actually more monitoring actually happening, so the compliance actually starts improving. So that's one thing which I can definitely tell you that. That's not to say that companies have been wantonly probably trying to destroy or anything like that, but it is just to say that everybody starts getting better information. So once you start getting better information and to start seeing the effects of actually all these actions, which is having on the environment, water bodies, the pollution and emissions and everything, I do see that then companies, corporates do start changing. Not just corporates, even governments. So we have seen actually quite a lot of development actually happening even in big bodies. And also actually in certain forest areas, the biodiversity has been increasing. But this all depends upon how much more information that people are able to get and the quality of the information.
Thank you.
I just like to allude also to your other question, which you kind of posed to Raymond and Jeevan on the SDG versus do we need to rename it? I would just say that you call a rose by any name, it's still a rose. So, but I think why this thing about when we are talking about SDG, all this conversation comes back to climate is because probably climate is central to most of the other SDGs. So you solve the actually climate problem, then I think a lot of other things also start falling in place. So that could be one of the issue that this becomes actually a nodal point.
Yeah. I think that was a very good thought-provoking, at least points which we got. And also I think when I see some of the questions allude to that as well, because otherwise there's no fun if we don't have that thought-provoking and discussion on the stage. So I think, Raymond, let me start with you on the one which we have 9 votes. Profit, people, or planet? From an investor's view, which comes first for you and why? Don't tell me it's profit.
Well, I like to say it depends on what your KPIs are, your balance scorecard, right? Your short-term, medium-term, and long-term, right? As we are part of Prudential, as an insurance company, if you have a prudential policy, very high chance it's your monies and which you invested it for protection or investment for the long term is with me. Now, how do I juggle that? Short term, of course, everybody has KPIs. But I always tell my bosses, look, we are here as a long-term company. We've been in business for, and next year we're celebrating our 100th year in Malaysia. So it's going to be quite significant. Prudential being in Malaysia for 100 years. We're here even before Malaya was born. So I think that there has to be element of all three. Otherwise, what is our purpose here? If it's just to generate profit, sorry if I offend anybody, the American way would be a new CEO come on board, I fire half the staff, lay half the people, shut down 5 offices, my profit goes up 50% in the year 1. Year 3, everything goes to shambles because you've gutted the whole company. Profit in the short term is bad. But I think profit, you look at it as sustainable profit. As an investor, I'll look at it, if the profit is sustainable over time, you have annuity coming in from what your actions you're doing. It's more than just once off. I'll buy in. Right? So I think that is the way, the longer term that your work, that what you're doing to the company has annuity returns over time. What you save for in energy, let's say only it's like $1 million a year, but $1 million a year compounded in 20 years is a lot of money, right? So I'll look at that from that point. Yes, shorter term is important, but it must be sustainable in the longer term.
Maybe we call it impact returns rather than profit. So Jeevan, let me go to you. There's one question on share one agenda that has been done by TCS in Malaysia around the sustainability, because I understand you guys support quite a few initiatives outside in social enterprise space.
So very funnily, we went to our customer and said that we need to do something for Malaysia. And he said, yeah, what do you want to do? And we said, there's something about youth and unemployment in Malaysia we want to do. So we curated something, and it's called Seed Lab. It's with one of the largest oil and gas company in Malaysia. And the whole idea was to say, as opposed to giving the youngsters fish, we wanted to teach them how to fish. So we curated an incubator program for 12 months, where we get youngsters who are passionate about a cause in society, incubate them, take them through design thinking, design learning, curation of MPVs, and then push them into a Shark Tank. And all we ask them is only 3 things. Whatever you come up must be feasible, must be sustainable, and must be desirable. Such a way that whatever product you create, there is a viable market outside. So this is on cohort 2. We have 3 startups graduated from that particular program who provide a whole lot of employability for youngsters. We've got 6 in the garage right now. 6 startups who will probably graduate in the next couple of months. And subsequently next year, we'll get another cohort 3. Why did we do that? Has it been done before in Malaysia? No. Was this a Pathfinder program? Yes. Do we know what was the return of that investment? No. But we suddenly realized when we started this journey, the kind of impact it created in both organizations was simply phenomenal. People suddenly said, this is an organization with purpose, whether if it's from an oil and gas company or whether it's a technology company. So Seed Lab is one particular agenda that is very close to our heart, and we want to make this into a movement of sort for social enterprises. So we want to have this garage to create many more social enterprise startups in Malaysia so that they can go out and create more jobs for the youngsters.
Thank you. So I think one of the things what you guys can also do is, because when I was listening to Raymond, he had this young guy coming for the interview, and he asked, what is your SDG, ESG goals? I think the challenge which I see from you, you said that we want youth to be involved. But I don't know what we should do with people like 40 plus like us, so that we also play a critical part, because nobody says that a 40-year-old guy came for an interview and said, what is your ESG strategy? So we need to really figure out how do we get these guys, because I think even we care about it, but we don't get credit, the amount of credit the young guys actually get. So let me take one with you, Jeevan, then I come to you, the SME one with you, Raymond. So when come to driving the sustainability, how to make companies moving from compliance to transforming?
Compliance, I don't know, it's a good one. The way we do it, with the way we've done it, we've made sure that everything that we do is compliant to the laws of the country, number one. But more important to us is it has to be transformational. It has to be something that's not done before. And when we have this conversation with our customers, we talk about initiatives that the first question is, hey, tell me where is it done before? I say it's not done anywhere else. And that's the reason we should do it. And that's where the Pathfinder way of doing things creates a lot of excitement for the youngsters. It becomes a headache with the board because they don't know what risk they're exposing, but you need to manage it. As long as they see you've towed the line, you're doing the right thing, then they give you the leeway to do that Pathfinder approach. Because the world have not seen this before. There's no books or manuals for us to read and implement. We just need to see our own respective ecosystem and see what more we can do. I can tell you a case in point. We're doing something with the National General Hospital for kids with cancer. Why do we start that? We happen to be there. Kids with cancer in Malaysia, they don't get funding. And everybody knows General Hospital doesn't have the bed capacity to accommodate kids with cancer. So we spend 1 year with the doctors and say, there must be a way we can reduce the time to cure a child with cancer from 8 months to 4 months. And I said, what do you need from a doctor perspective? And he says, I need symptomatic data after they do chemo. And we did that. We got a platform. We curated that just last week. One of the largest airlines have come with us, partnered us, and say, for all my planes that flying around Malaysia, if I've got additional capacity, these kids and parents can fly for free. Did we plan it? No. We just went out and got the ecosystem coming in, and suddenly we see the National Cancer Society is jumping to joy. It's something which they never figured it out. They didn't know what was it. It is again a Pathfinder program.
Yeah. So one idea, I got a term for you which you can focus on, the silver entrepreneurship. Okay. So that we can also become social entrepreneur and contribute to meeting, at least 2 of us qualify for that? Yeah, okay. Raymond, so let me quickly go to Chandru on the compliance side. So when you talk to the companies, you said the challenge is the mental block. What do you think we can do more so that companies become more compliant? Forget about transforming. There are a large number of companies which are not even complying to the whole framework. So Chandru, if you have to come up with 1 or 2 ideas, what will those be?
Companies like MSCI and Blue Sky. So what actually drives compliance in the first place is I would say the engagement with by the investors and the kind of monitoring mechanisms which they would actually have, and the kind of disclosures which they would, and the quality of the disclosures which they expect. So that's one. The second thing is the regulations on the policy drivers. So that's a very important point. And as you would know that I'm engaged in actually drafting, I'm one of the part of the committee which is drafting sustainable finance regulations for India. So I would say that the policy and the regulations and the way investors engage actively, not just actually passively, and also actually help the companies in this process, I think that actually moves them to compliance. The transformation is also happening, Nitin, in a different way, and where companies are seeing profits and where they see that there is a need which can be actually solved. There is a lot of the climate tech and everything which is actually flourishing. The electric vehicle industry is a prime example of something like that, and there are many more in sustainable packaging and everything which is actually coming up, where companies are transforming themselves to serve all these needs. Where they see a business, this one, and where it is coming from policy, I think companies are jumping onto that transformation bandwagon also.
Yeah. Thank you, Chandru. I think we just missed the question on the SME. So I think if I can recollect question, Raymond, what we were discussing earlier is, it's easy for large companies to be more compliant, and how do we actually get that to SMEs where they are constrained by the expertise, they are constrained by the capital, and also they are constrained by, there's no external pressure like investors like yourself to do, to comply to SDG. So how do we actually get these SMEs, which is a large part of economies in many parts of the world, into the mainstream of SDG?
Yeah, I believe the second part of the question was tax incentives, right? there's always the easy path, a tax incentive to do something. So it becomes a bit more compliance sort of thing. But sad to say, I'm sure all you know the government is actually lack of funds. So the government needs every tax dollar they can get in this environment. So, but how do you as SMEs engage in that? Now, I would think that I would say it's easy for big companies. I would say that for smaller companies, you don't need to have grand plans. You need sustainable plans, and you need to plan it forward. What do you want to do? Now, this is where I'm not considered a big company. For where a company, I have about 150 employees. Creating an environment where your employee is more productive, happier, I think is a big premium to the pay in that. Now, just looking at, I've been here in this company about 6 years. In the last 5 years, for every 10 people who left my company, 3 applied to join back. 30%, roughly. So I thought, why is that? So I got my HR people to talk to them, They said that, well, although we were paid like 40% higher, we weren't happy that people were working together, people were very competitive even within the same teams. But coming here, people working together to achieve a common goal. And the office environment is nice, or there's a plus. So that factor trumps profit, right? So creating the environment where you get more productivity out from your staff, I think is one. Now, to companies like this in this current environment, of course, people want to cut costs, cut headcount, cut everything. That's an easy path. But by doing a little bit different, okay, I'll pay you, your staff are not unaware of what's happening in the world and in the economy. But let's say you go and say, look, okay, we'll pay you more, but we'll cut your bonus because we know that your sustainable pay is more important than your bonus because you live from day to day, right? So that, I think, will get more traction that they say, look, the company is aware that I will need to do more to stay in this company. Now, I also had a policy the last couple of years where the lower ranked staff gets a higher pay increase in percentage than the seniors. Seniors actually get like 1%. But at 1%, let's say, of 15,000, it's more in absolute terms than the 7-8% that the lowest tier get. In percentage terms, they're happy. They know that, well, this disparity, that we're trying to narrow the parity. So look beyond tax incentives. Tax incentives, it comes and goes. Does it mean that you stop doing it if the tax incentive goes away? You don't, right? So look beyond just the financial. Look for something beyond that, where if your employees are proud to work for your company, if your employees will stay with you for 10, 15, 20 years, I think you're doing something right there,
Thank you. So I think, we'll just take how specifically create an SDG impact. I think, you guys have shared. But my next question, which is going to be the last part of the discussion, we'll cover some of that. So let me start with Chandru this time. We have seen a lot of talk and discussions been happening about how do we, compliant with SDG goals. We have been making progress, but that progress to larger extent has been incremental on the overall basis. You may have some organization doing very good job, but when you average it out, the growth at best is incremental. But when you look at the scientific evidence, which clearly says that the time of incremental changes is behind us, we need to really accelerate our action to protect this earth from the climate crisis. Okay, so Chandru, let me start with you. What can we do more to accelerate the whole process of complying with some of the key SDG goals rather than just be happy with the incremental one? If we have 1 or 2 ideas for the audience, that will be helpful.
Thank you, Nitin. So I would say that climate change and its effects are becoming more volatile and extreme, and it is no more about actually affecting the future generations. I mean, everybody living in this planet right now are getting affected, more and more. So it's nothing which is getting actually pushed down to the future generations. So it's getting more volatile and more extreme. And what was once thought which would be happening in the distant happening right now. The learning process and implementation process has to accelerate across the board, both vertically and horizontally. Also, climate change is not only about managing risks, but I alluded to this in the other question which you mentioned. It's also presenting a plethora of opportunities. And the ones who can do it will come out on tops and at a much faster pace. And we are seeing this in many, many industries where people are grabbing these opportunities, not just electric vehicles. Sustainability in textiles is something which is coming up. Even Malaysia is a big exporter of palm. There is now a big movement to switch over to sustainable palm oil. So that's something which is actually coming up all across the world, and investors are getting into it. So similarly, you take actually, even in consumer products. So there is a lot of opportunities which are coming up. Veganism is actually something, which is catching up across the world. And even in detergents. So there are companies now which are actually looking at how do I actually make detergents or washing machines which consume less water. And that is because, all across the world, people are actually having this problem of less resources as the populations are growing. We're just going to hit 8 billion people on this planet. So how will we actually manage this? And there's even the food supply chain. Insect protein is being actually spoken about a lot now. So how do actually people get into actually seeing that and how protein can be actually provided to people at a much lesser cost and more abundance. So likewise, there are many of these opportunities which are coming up. And that's where I think the mindset change has to shift from being actually incremental. And then, how do you actually accelerate this entire thing? It's to look at more of an opportunities spectrum.
Yeah. Thank you, Chandru. So let me go to Jeevan.
I, for one, have this true belief that if you want to scale from just incremental values to exponential value, in any business you are, you need to have technology or digital platforms. Only then you can scale, number one. Number two, the days of incremental outcomes are long gone. Everybody's wanting exponential outcome. And if markets are pushing for exponential and your customers are pushing for exponential, you need to think about where you can scale yourself from a digital platform. And we've seen over the last couple of years, only companies who have scaled significantly were the ones that own a digital platform. So digital is a fundamental ingredient in any of this organization. And in fact, if you're a bank, you need to be a digital, sustainable bank first. Not a bank trying to do something digital and sustainable. If you're in an energy business, you need to be a digital, sustainable energy company. If you make that paradigm shift, then you see many opportunities opening up.
Yeah. So if I can quickly add to the digital part, one good example is the fintech. So if you see the whole revolution in the financial markets came about of the technology disruption which fintech got. To be honest, I think large banks were forced to act on it because the disruption forced them to accelerate the process. In absence of that, I don't think many banks would have still been the traditional banks. So I completely agree with you. Technology disruption is going to play a huge role, which will force the companies to accelerate the process from just compliance to transformation. But also, we all know the people with the money will always have the last word. So man with the money, Mr. Raymond Tang. So your words.
Well, I agree that the pace needs to accelerate. But in order for it to accelerate, the buy-in has to be widespread, not just the chairman of the board or the CEO. It has to be widespread, and everybody needs to move. And where there's a momentum, it's very hard to stop the momentum, right? And for companies yourself, there's no need to reinvent the wheel if you want to do any of this digital. There's nothing new under the sun. Somebody else has done it. Just replicate. There's no shame or no, I would say, to copy somebody else because it's a sincerest form of flattery. It works. Why need to reinvent the wheel and spend more money and waste of time? Right. For us, we use the term used in our company now is modular. Right, we recently did a digital platform a couple of years ago, And it's changed from I write the whole software code myself, I want to be ring-fenced, and I own the source code. It has moved from that. I buy what is available in the market, put it together, make it work. Think of it like Lego bricks. I buy a bit for the platform, I buy a bit for my API machine, I buy a bit for my compliance, I buy outsourcing expert for my AML, and you make it all work together. They just need to talk in the same language, right? It's just like how Lego blocks. They all can fit together, irrespective sizes. Of course, you don't buy another brand that it won't fit, right? So the important thing is you need to be more agile, and it's quicker to market, it's cheaper, and when you want to replace one component, you just disengage the component and pipe in the new one and reattach the pipes. It's faster and very much more downtime than replacing the entire platform. So I think that's the way forward. Agile. People like to say think out of the box. I'd like to challenge you to think further. There is no box. There's no box, right? You draw whatever you like. So I know CFOs, I'm a qualified accountant. I know how we think. You have to be managed by numbers. But think out of the box. The box only constrains thinking. There's no box.
Thank you, Raymond. So if I can quickly summarize some of the things which I picked up from this conversation. One is, the days of incremental changes are over. If we really care about the society, if we really care about this earth, we need to really accelerate. And to accelerate, technology will play a very important part. So we should encourage as many new technology disruptions as possible. So it may actually come from outside, not within the industry, as we have seen in the fintech. And the second most important thing is we should not put the responsibility on the institutions to make SDG happen. We have to make individuals responsible. And also, not only make them compliant to it, but instead of if they actually make it as a culture, then automatically it becomes transformational. Because people do not feel as a responsibility, but they feel it is something they really care about and all that. So this is the only way we could actually make this progress toward SDG possible. So this was a very interesting conversation, and also have to thank the audience for actively participating the questions, because I have to really put back my phone because I didn't need to ask any questions because I had to carry with some of the thoughts you have raised. So that makes this conversation very interesting. And also I want to thank Chandru for joining us from Delhi in India into this. But before I pass it on, I have to mention Firoz and his team. For really, I've been working with them for last 2 years during pandemic. They are one of the most passionate people I have come across to really solve and focus and do something around the SDG space. A huge compliment to them, and a huge compliment to the panelists and the participant for making this session and this day a very productive one. I hope you guys will enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nitin Jaiswal, Head of Government and Regulatory Affairs and Strategic Relations at Bloomberg LP Asia Pacific, moderator for a very interesting panel session. Thank you so much to the panelists as well for sharing lots of nuggets with us today. I'm sure plenty of takeaways, accelerate. And I like how Mr. Nitin said, Mr. Raymond, don't think outside of the box. There is no box. That's high-level thinking, man, I'm telling you.